The Blackwood Mine was a scar on the face of the Appalachian Mountains, abandoned since the cold morning of November 12, 1955, when 12 men descended for the day shift and simply never returned. No cave-in, no distress signal, just silence. The case was closed as a tragic, inexplicable disappearance. 50 years later, in the humid summer of 2005, a geological survey team arrived, planning to finally seal the unstable mine shaft. Leading the team was Dr. Aris Thorne, a structural engineer with an unsettling fascination for the Blackwood case. On the third day, a specialized drone mapping the lower levels suddenly went dark. When Thorne's team finally recovered the wreckage, they didn't find the drone's shattered components. They found a pickaxe, the wood handle petrified, the metal head gleaming with a sickening modern polish. Following the drone's last recorded coordinates, Thorne and two local investigators, armed with high-powered lamps, descended into a previously uncharted side tunnel. The air grew heavy, smelling not of sulfur or coal dust, but of ozone and something metallic and sharp. They emerged into a vast cavern that had clearly been expanded, not by picks and dynamite, but by incredible heat. In the center of the cavern, stacked neatly, were the faded, mold-covered helmets of the 12 missing miners. And beyond them, covering the entire back wall, was the terrifying secret. It wasn't gold or a new vein of ore. It was a dense, almost liquid-looking obsidian panel, humming with a barely audible static. Etched into its surface were complex, interlocking symbols that looked ancient and impossibly alien. Near the panel, the investigators found a makeshift diary, waterlogged but still legible. It was the last entry from the Blackwood foreman, dated November 13, 1955. The trembling script detailed not a cave-in, but a discovery, a singing rock that made their teeth ache. The entry abruptly ended, but scrawled underneath in a completely different, unnervingly steady hand was a final sentence. They asked to see the stars from the inside. We obliged. The three investigators backed away slowly, their flashlights illuminating scorch marks that spiderwebbed away from the obsidian panel and up into the very ceiling of the mine. The panel had not been found by the miners, it had been activated by them, and whatever lay beyond was still waiting, having simply used a tunnel entrance as a temporary, terrifying 50-year door. The obsidian panel's hum climbed a terrifying octave, rattling the teeth in Thorne's skull. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt bolted to the cavern floor. The two local investigators, seasoned men named Joe and Hank, were already scrambling for the exit when the air pressure dropped with a sharp, concussive pop. All three of the high-powered lamps, previously cutting brilliant swaths through the gloom, snapped off simultaneously. Absolute, suffocating blackness enveloped them, a blackness that felt heavy, wet, and foul. "Joe, Hank, stay together," Thorne shouted. Then the panel ignited.
It didn't glow, it flared, a blinding, silent light, the color of a distant, dying nebula, swirling violet and incandescent gold, shot out from the alien etchings. This light wasn't illumination, it was an invasive force. As the beam washed over the cavern, it revealed a spectacle that made Thorne's mind recoil. In the brief, searing light, the helmets of the 12 missing miners were no longer just empty relics. They were surrounded by 12 distinct spheres of shimmering, translucent energy, each the size of a man. Within the confines of these orbs, the foreman's last words became horrifyingly clear. The light wasn't an exit, it was a containment field. The miners hadn't been killed or teleported, they had been compressed. The light had given them the stars, but not around them, inside them. As the nebula-colored energy pulsed, Thorne noticed something else, something new. One of the 13 spheres of light was incomplete. It was struggling to form near the tunnel's entrance, and it was drawing its substance from the living things closest to it. The sphere rushed toward them, dragging the air, the dust, and the very sound out of the tunnel. Hank, slower than the others, cried out, a choked, gargling sound as the energy slammed into him. His heavy jacket and boots fell to the floor an instant later, empty. Thorne and Joe scrambled around the corner and into the narrow side tunnel. The light, however, didn't stop. It began to pour liquid and fast around the edges of the rock, forcing them into a desperate crawl up the incline, knowing that the thing that took the miners, the thing that wrote in their diary, was no longer waiting. It was following. The obsidian panel's hum climbed a terrifying octave, rattling the teeth in Thorne's skull. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet felt bolted to the cavern floor. The 2 local investigators, seasoned men named Joe and Hank, were already scrambling for the exit when the air pressure dropped with a sharp, concussive pop. All 3 of their high-powered lamps, previously cutting brilliant swaths through the gloom, snapped off simultaneously. Absolute, suffocating darkness enveloped them, a blackness that felt heavy, wet, and final. "Joe! Hank! Stay together!" Thorne shouted, his voice swallowed instantly. Then the panel ignited. It didn't glow, it flared. A blinding, silent light, the color of a distant, dying nebula, swirling violet and incandescent gold, shot out from the alien etchings. This light wasn't illumination, it was an invasive force. As the beam washed over the cavern, it revealed a spectacle that made Thorne's mind recoil. In the brief, searing light, the helmets of the 12 missing miners were no longer just empty relics. They were surrounded by 12 distinct spheres of shimmering, translucent energy, each the size of a man. Within the confines of these orbs, the foreman's last words became horrifyingly clear. The light wasn't an exit, it was a containment field. The miners hadn't been killed or teleported. They had been compressed. The light had given them the stars, but not around them, inside them.
As the nebula-colored energy podge, the spheres of light, was incomplete. It was struggling to form near the tunnel entrance, and it was drawing its substance from the living things closest to it. The sphere rushed toward them, dragging the air, the dust, and the very sound out of the tunnel. Hank, slower than the others, cried out, a choked, gargling sound as the energy slammed into him. His heavy jacket and boots fell to the floor an instant later, empty. Thorne and Joe scrambled around the corner and into the narrowed side tunnel. The light, however, didn't stop. It began to pour, liquid and fast, around the edges of the rock, forcing them into a desperate crawl up the incline, knowing that the thing that took the miners, the thing that wrote in their diary, was no longer waiting. It was following. The terrifying secret was not that the miners had vanished, but that they were still here, trapped in a terrifying state of stellar observation. And the price for disturbing their eternal glowing watch was the addition of 1, 2, or perhaps 3 more souls. The frantic scramble up the side tunnel was a battle against physics and fear.
Joe, a heavy-set man who'd spent 40 years mining, wheezed, his flashlight now useless, weight in his hand. Thorne, driven by cold horror, pushed ahead, his eyes fixed on the distant pale glimmer of the main shaft. Behind them, the liquid light, that terrifying nebula-colored plasma, was flowing like water uphill, silent and relentless. They burst into a small, familiar junction. Joe collapsed against the support beam, grabbing his chest. I can't breathe," he gasped. "It's stealing the air." Thorne looked back. The tunnel behind them was no longer dark. It was a churning river of purple and gold. But what froze his blood wasn't the light itself. It was the sound that finally returned. It wasn't the scream of a trapped man or the whine of machinery, but a low, sustained harmonic tone. A deep thrumming that resonated not from the air, but from the solid rock around them. It was the singing the foreman had described. As the lights bailed into the junction, it illuminated Joe, who now had the terrible realization of what was happening. He wasn't out of breath. The air was being stolen. The light wasn't just energy. It was a vacuum, designed to extract something fundamental. "The metal," Joe wheezed, pointing to the support beam he was leaning against. "The pickaxe, it was clean." The light touched Joe's outstretched hand. His skin didn't burn or peel. It simply faded. Within seconds, Joe was gone. His worn canvas clothes and the beam he was leaning against were all that remained, his mass having been converted into a new, smaller, 13th shimmering sphere of captive light. Thorne didn't wait. He scrambled over Joe's discarded clothing and sprinted for the main shaft elevator, the cosmic hum vibrating through his very bones. He knew the terrifying truth now. The alien battle was a device designed not to kill, but to preserve to perfection. It took organic matter and, by forcing the light of the universe inward, preserved the consciousness in a state of eternal, self-contained observation. They were not dead. They were living batteries, and the panel needed 13 to complete its stellar circuit. He raised the cage and slammed the archaic emergency button. As the elevator shuddered and began its agonizingly slow ascent, Thorne looked down. The entire floor of the junction was smell and incandescent full.
Just before the rising cage carried him out of sight, he saw a shape emerge from the light. It wasn't alien. It was the foreman. Transparent and glowing, his body now composed of the very energy that had consumed his crew 50 years ago. The glowing man looked up, his lips not moving, yet the words echoed in Thorne's mind with chilling clarity. "The circuit is almost complete, Doctor. We have been waiting for the 13th battery to power the final transmission home. Thank you for coming back for us." The last thing Thorne saw before the door shielded him was the foreman's glowing hand, reaching upward, patiently waiting for the elevator to descend and complete its horrifying 50-year mission. The elevator cage groaned, its rusted cables squeaking against the main shaft's pulley system. To Dr. Thorne, the 5-minute ascent felt like a geological era. He clung to the cold metal cage, the spectral voice of the foreman echoing in his skull. "Thank you for coming back for us." The foreman hadn't just been waiting. He'd been guiding the investigation for 50 years, ensuring the final component, the 13th battery, would arrive. When the cage finally lurched to a halt at the mine mouth, the midday sun was a blinding, merciful salutation. Thorne stumbled out onto the cracked concrete apron, gasping to clean mountain air. The 2 surface technicians assigned to the sealing operation stared at him, bewildered. He was covered in soot, sweat, and a fine iridescent dust that clung to his face like glitter. "Thorne,
What happened? Where's Joe and Hank? The lead tech, a young man named Manny, asked, stepping forward. Thorne couldn't articulate the truth, not the glowing spear, the preserved consciousness, or the cosmic battery. His mind seized on the simplest, most alarming fact. The air! They're still down there, but the air's going bad. Get the shaft sealed, Thorne roared, his voice raw. Before Manny could react, a piercing resonant hum began to rise from the mine shaft, louder than any machine, deeper than any truck. The sound vibrated the very gravel beneath their boots. Then the two technicians' electronic gear, their radio, their GPS tracker, and the small battery packs on their belts began to sizzle and smoke. The iridescent dust on Thorne's face started to hum as well, glowing faintly blue in the sunlight. He looked back at the mine entrance and saw it, a shimmering thermal distortion, like heat rising off asphalt, was beginning to pool just inside the shaft's mouth. The light, the entity, the foreman, was following. It was trying to escape its power source. Thorne knew the light needed 13. It had 12, and it had Joe. It only needed one more, him. He sprinted for the part survey vehicle, grabbing the satellite phone and the case of high-grade plastic explosives they brought for the final sealing operation. He locked eyes with Manning, who stood frozen, watching the strange thermal shimmer grow. "Call the nearest military base. Tell them there is a highly reactive stellar event at the Blackwood Mine," Thorne shouted, slamming the explosives into the truck's cab. "Then run! Don't look back! Run to the next county and don't stop!" Manny finally broke from his stupor as Thorne slammed the accelerator and fist-tailed the truck away from the mine. Manny grabbed the radio, his hands trembling. He had seen enough science fiction movies to know that stellar event was far worse than cave-in. Thorne didn't drive for safety. He drove to gain distance. He parked the truck a quarter-mile down the access road, rigged the plastic explosives around the cluster of the largest, most stable granite boulders he could find, and punched the detonator's coordinates into a timer.
The ground-shaking boom of the explosives was immediate and deafening, severing the access road and sending tons of earth cascading toward the mine entrance. Thorne only hoped the collapsing surface earth was enough to choke the shaft long enough for the military to arrive. He stood in the dust cloud, the satellite phone pressed to his ear, listening to the static while holding his breath. The vibration stopped. The hum was gone. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the deep mountain rock, the singing started again. Faint, but unmistakable, and Thorne knew it had not been stopped. It had merely found a new, harder exit to dig. Manny's frantic satellite call was routed not to a local police precinct, but to a classified operations desk at the Pentagon. Within 5 hours, before Dr. Aris Thorne had even finished his first rambling, incoherent debriefing in a sterile temporary holding facility, Operation Blacksite was activated. A specialized unit codenamed Spectre Platoon, a mix of deep reconnaissance infantry and engineers trained for subterranean hazard recovery, was dispatched to the Blackwood Mine. Their objective was simple: secure and verify the nature of the highly reactive stellar event. They arrived under the cloak of a manufactured storm warning, sealing off a 5-mile radius. Colonel Marcus Vance, a man who believed only in measurable threats like ballistics and chemical agents, surveyed the choked mine shaft's entrance. He had dismissed Thorne's tale as pressure-induced hysteria, but the sheer enduring energy signature the mine was emitting forced his hand. The equipment readings were staggering.
a constant, low-level gravimetric distortion, and a continuous discharge of gamma radiation that was far too stable to be natural. Thence ordered the engineers to clear the debris Thorne had caused, then sent Vector platoon down. The platoon's descent was silent, their gear sophisticated, oxygen recyclers, tactical lights that cut through the perpetual gloom, and helmet-mounted infrared cameras. The first thing they noticed was the heat. The air in the main shaft was a suffocating 130 degrees Fahrenheit, even 50 feet from the mine mouth. The second was the smell, a sharp, metallic scent like ozone and burnt copper. They reached the junction where Joe had vanished. The scene was inexplicable. The support beam was fractured, but there was no ash or scorch marks. Just the remnants of Joe's clothes, and more disturbingly, a faint, shimmering film of iridescent dust that coated the rock face. Their lead geologist, a young lieutenant named Hayes, knelt down. "Colonel, the rock structure here, it's been recrystallized. It looks like obsidian, but the composition is wrong. It's been subjected to temperatures that should have melted the mountain, but the rock didn't melt, it purified." As they moved toward the cavern, the singing began. It was the same low, resonant harmonic tone Thorne had heard, and it was so pervasive that it triggered immediate vertigo and nausea in platoon members. It wasn't sound traveling through the air. It was a wave of vibration resonating through their bones.
When Spectre Platoon entered the cavern, their tactical lights illuminated the terror. The massive, humming obsidian panel was still there, but it was no longer just a wall. The surrounding rock had been fully consumed, leaving the panel the dominant feature of a chamber that looked like a forge. The 12 and the new 13th sphere of captive light, Joe, floated silently. But the spheres were not stationary anymore. They were pulsing rhythmically, and between each glowing sphere, a thin, silver strand of energy now pulsed, connecting them into a gigantic, horrific stellar battery circuit. The transmission. Vance, watching the feed from the surface command center, could only whisper, "What in God's name?" Hayes, ignoring the vertigo, approached the panel to collect samples. As he extended his gloved hand, the light circuit completed itself. The 13 spheres brightened instantly, and the entire cavern flooded with the blinding violet gold light. Then, the true objective of the 50-year wait was revealed. The obsidian panel didn't open a door, it became a speaker. A sudden, massive surge of energy erupted from the circuit, and the singing stopped, replaced by a devastatingly loud static burst, a burst that instantly blew out the platoon's helmet comms and sensors. But within the static, there was a message. Not words, but a rapid, rhythmic series of perfectly timed pulses, a signal that was not intended for Earth. The 13 souls, the 12 miners, and Joe had finally gathered enough localized energy to power a single brief transmission into the void. The Spectre Plutona was left scrambling in the aftermath of the pulse, deafened and disoriented as the heat intensified to unbearable levels. The spheres began to slow their pulsing, the transmission complete. They had delivered their payload. As the light dimmed, a new set of data flickered across the surface monitors, a trace reading from deep space. The transmission, brief as it was, had been received, and the data confirmed something far more terrifying than the fate of the miners. The source of the receiving signal was not a distant galaxy, but an object currently on an interstellar trajectory directly toward Earth. The miners had discovered a secret. They had sent a beacon, and 50 years later, their response was on its way. Dr. Thorne was no longer a civilian.
He was a designated national asset. Flown via stealth helicopter to a secure underground facility near Washington, D.C., he sat across a massive steel table from Colonel Vance, who had barely escaped the mine before the devastating energy surge, and Director Helena Voss, a woman who controlled more satellite intelligence than the president. Voss led a printer across the table. It was the data capture from the Blackwood signal. "It wasn't a distress call, Dr. Thorne," Voss stated, her voice flat and professional. "It was a navigation beacon. The miners weren't asking to be rescued. They were providing directional coordinates for arrival."
Thorne picked up the printout. It wasn't numbers. It was a simplified stellar map, identical in its interlocking geometry to the symbols on the obsidian panel. They needed the energy of 13 mines, the 13 batteries, to broadcast this. He shook his head. They made a delivery. Vance, nursing a bandage on his neck where the radiation had caused a searing burn, pointed to a line of text at the bottom. "Our deep space network confirmed a response. It's a single, massive object. Velocity suggests it was already in transit before the beacon. It was just waiting for the destination." Voss pulled up a holographic display. A bright crimson dot appeared, positioned just beyond the orbit of Neptune. Its calculated arrival date on Earth, 48 hours. "We have 2 days, Voss said, tapping the display. 2 days until whatever constructed that panel and promised those men, the stars, arrives to collect its payment." The military's first instinct was simple. Destroy the arrival point. "We initiate a clean bombardment on the Blackwood Mine site, vaporize the dronal system, collapse the mountain on the panel, and destroy the beacon." Thorne slammed his hand on the table. "No! That panel is a device of preservation. You don't know what will happen when you destroy the source. You might release those souls, those energy spheres, and turn them into a volatile entity. Or worse, you might destroy the only piece of technology we have that can talk to it." He looked at the projected symbol on the table, the alien coordinates. The miners were promised an eternal view of the cosmos. The thing that wrote in that diary entry said, "We obliged." This isn't a destroyer. It's an archivist or a collector. We need to communicate before it lands. "And how do we do that?" Voss challenged. "We send a delegation down to ask the glowy, trapped foreman for an interpreter?" Thorne's gaze hardened. "No. We send a message back. The signal was rapid pulses, a mathematical language. We have the data from the panel, we have the coordinates it sent, and we have the circuit that powered it. We need to build a massive energy projector, aim it at the incoming object, and lie to it." The 3 most powerful people in the room stared at the crimson dot in the projected sky. 48 hours. The terrifying secret of the 12 vanished miners had brought the universe's quiet, methodical horror right to Earth's doorstep. And Dr. Eris Thorne had just volunteered to play the role of the galactic saboteur. Dr. Thorne and Colonel Vance returned immediately to the Blackwood Mine Command Center, now a hyper-secure military encampment. Vance tasked a team and physicists with rigging a temporary, massive VLF transmitter aimed at the incoming object, hoping to modulate the alien language of the beacon. But Dr. Thorne had a more immediate, chilling priority. He needed to know what the preserved foreman knew. He descended alone in a heavily shielded, specialized reconnaissance pod. The air was hotter than before, and the gravimetric distortion was so strong the metal around him groaned. When the pod touched down in the junction, he saw the horrifying truth. The alien panel was now pulsing visibly, and the 14 spherical batteries, including Joe and the earlier vanished Hank, were all now connected in the full circuit.
The energy was too chaotic for a direct encounter, so Thorne used a proprietary, highly directional acoustic array, a microphone designed to record seismic shifts, and aimed it toward the glowing cluster of spheres. He needed to capture the singing.
He activated the recorder and held his breath. The harmonic tone that resonated through the rock was deep, agonizing, and filled with 1 billion years of cosmic travel. As he processed the frequencies through a military-grade translator, the random thrumming resolved itself into a language that wasn't spoken, but felt. The voice of the foreman, trapped in eternal observation, flooded Thorne's headset, clear and despairing. "Doctor, they do not collect the body. They collect the knowledge of the stars." Thorne gripped the controls, heart pounding. "Foreman, you sent the signal. Why? What are you?" The voice shifted, growing colder, purer, almost electronic. "We are the archivists. We find those with deep sight, those who desire the core truth of the cosmos, and we give it to them. The miners asked to see the stars from the inside. We obliged." "And the collection is complete," Thorne shouted into the mic. "We're sending a message that the final battery, the 13th, escaped. We're delaying the arrival." The foreman's captured consciousness shrieked, a sound that cracked the translator. "No! The circuit. It requires a minimum of 13 to broadcast to destination. But the transmission of the lie, it requires a greater sacrifice to overpower the original truth. The signal you plan to send, it demands a greater power source." A new terrifying sound registered on Thorne's acoustic array. Not a harmonic hum of the archivists, but a brittle, high-pitched crackling coming from the VLF transmitter array on the surface. They were preparing to broadcast the lie. The foreman's final horrifying transmission broke through the chaos. "The lie will not delay it. It will only bring it down faster. And it will require not one more soul, Doctor, but the power of the full planet to send that lie." The spears of captured light pulsed with destructive intensity. Thorne realized the horrible flaw in his plan. The archivist ship would not be tricked by a simple mathematical adjustment. To send a powerful, believable counter-signal, a cosmic lie, they wouldn't just need a few people. They would need the electrical output and focused energy of Earth's entire defense grid. He scrambled the pod upward, yelling a single desperate command into his radio. "Vance, stop the broadcast. Do not send the lie. It's not a delay. It's a direct invitation." But he was too late. On the surface, the VLF transmitter, powered by a tactical nuclear reactor, was already charging, about to broadcast the massive, planet-sized lie across space, ensuring the archivist ship, which collects both the truth and the energy of those who spoke it, would arrive not in 48 hours, but possibly in 48 minutes. This is the culmination of the terror. The lie is broadcast, and the consequences are immediate and catastrophic.
Thorne's desperate radio call was a frantic whisper swallowed by static. On the surface, Colonel Vance, pale and exhausted, saw the energy meter spike to lethal levels. He hesitated for a breath, just long enough to hear the foreman's final warning relayed on the open channel, but the military protocol was absolute. The VLF antenna array, powered by the tactical reactor, roared to life. A blinding, vertical column of crimson energy shot from the Blackwood complex, punching a hole through the atmosphere and into the stars. The cosmic lie, the signal stating the final battery had escaped, had been sent. The results were instantaneous and terrifying. On Director Voss's monitor, thousands of miles away, the crimson dot representing the incoming object vanished from Neptune's orbit and reappeared, not in the predicted trajectory, but already blazing through the upper atmosphere. The collector hadn't been tricked or delayed. It had been challenged. The lie had provided the precise, concentrated energy signature it needed for an immediate final jump. The object was a massive, silent shadow, shaped like a perfect obsidian dodecahedron, surrounded by a faint violet aura.
It did not decelerate. It slammed into the ionosphere above the Blackwood Mine with a force that registered globally as a magnitude 9.0 seismic event. The harvesting. The arrival wasn't a crash. It was a sinking. The massive ship passed through the air and rock as if they were water, its bulk finding the precise center of the gravity well, created by the 13th sphere humming deep beneath the mountain. Inside the specialized pod, Dr. Thorin felt the ground shudder and then yield. The mindset began to collapse in a roar of grinding rock. The power in the archivist's panel surged, its light becoming a solid beam of violet gold energy that shot upward, directly connecting with the descending dodecahedron ship. The connection was not a welcome. It was a harvest. As the ship settled into the mountain, a silent wave of energy radiated outward, engulfing the military encampment. The hundreds of soldiers, technicians, and scientists on the surface didn't feel pain. Their bodies simply became translucent, and in the space of a single heartbeat, their consciousnesses were extracted, not individually, but as a single massive screaming stream of collective thought, pulled upward into the orbiting behemoth. The lie indeed required a greater sacrifice. It had harvested not 13 souls, but hundreds of thousands of accumulated memories and observations, drawn to the challenge the pulse signal represented. Thorn, protected only by the pod's extreme shielding, and the fact that he was so close to the original power source, watched the terrifying spectacle on his exterior monitor. The lights of the encampment winked out. The military vehicles were left pristine and empty. He was now alone in the deepest part of the collapsing mine, connected by a shimmering being of alienity to a ship that had just harvested the entire surface operation. The foreman's voice, now a triumphant chorus, backed by the new, silent screams of hundreds of collected soldiers, resonated one last time in his headset. The lie was the greatest truth of all, Doctor. You told us where to lie in the heart of this planet's energy. Now observe.
As the message ended, the light inside Thorn's pod dimmed, and a horrifying realization came over him. The ship wasn't finished. It had collected the energy of the lie, but it still needed the truth. And the truth, the knowledge, the experience, the full, complete perspective of the last person to understand the archivist's method was still inside him. The mine was collapsing. The ship was drawing power, and Dr. Eris Thorn had become the final, most valuable specimen in the cosmic archive. The seismic event was recorded by every geological station on Earth. The disappearance of an entire military task force and a top-tier intelligence director from the highly classified command center near Washington, D.C. was instantly recognized as a catastrophic, impossible security failure. 2 hours after the impact, a squadron of F-22 fighters carrying specialized sensors approached the coordinates of the Blackwood Mine. What they found was not a crater, but a place of unnatural stillness. The entire mountain peak was lower, as if compressed. The ground around the mine was scorched and flattened, yet eerily pristine. Every vehicle, every piece of military hardware, and every soldier's uniform remained exactly where it had been, except they were all perfectly, inexplicably empty. There were no bodies, no blood, and no signs of struggle or violence, just the chilling evidence of an instantaneous, silent extraction. The massive obsidian dodecahedron ship was gone, having completed its harvest and vanished back into the void as silently as it had arrived. The only signal they found came from Dr. Thorne's abandoned reconnaissance pod buried deep beneath the Earth's shifted crust. When they recovered the pod and accessed its final recordings, they didn't find a video or a scream. They found a chilling, final data packet, a compressed stellar map, identical to the one on the archivist panel, but with one critical addition. The map didn't just show the path to Earth, it showed the path from Earth. Dr. Aristorn, in his final moments, had understood the archivist's methodology. They were not malicious conquerors. They were cold, methodical curators. They took the minds that sought the deepest truths and preserved them forever in a state of eternal observation, powered by the energy of their own sacrifice. The lie had failed, but the final undeniable truth, the full knowledge of Earth's most brilliant and curious mind, was the final, most valuable specimen. The final data packet was a subtle, almost taunting invitation broadcast by the now fully charged archivist shit. It contained the coordinates not of their home world, but of their next destination, thousands of light years away. The terrifying secret of the miners was now the world's knowledge. The archivists would return, but not soon. They did not conquer or destroy. They simply collected the most insightful minds from a dying star system, preserved them as shining captive energies, and then moved on to the next place, where intellectual curiosity might become the ultimate, horrifying sacrifice. Earth was now catalogued, archived, and waiting for its slow, inevitable turn on the cosmic shelf.